welcome back to Quality Coffee Break. On today's episode, Amy and I are going to talk to you about hiring people and what you might want to look for as an interviewer. And if you are looking to move into a role, into a quality professional role or into an advanced role, maybe you'll get some ideas about how you can nail that interview.
Yes, so this is really a podcast of two halves. So you as the hiring individual and you as the interviewee. So we're also going to go over competencies and more of a cultural fit as well. So one of the first things I think is really important in terms of a competency based is being able to confidently ensure that your person that you're going to be hiring understands basic quality concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. First order of business, you want to know that they have the experience, especially if you're looking for a role that you're not looking to train somebody on how to be QA. If you're looking, you need somebody who can hit the ground running. You want to confirm that they have that necessary experience and skill set.
Yes, so one of the things I would really be looking for is, do they understand things like the risk-based approach? Now, we know 13405 talks about risk so much, but does that individual really have a firm grasp and understanding of what that means in practice?
Absolutely agree, totally agree. I also have like news hot off the press, sort of some information coming out of the very first FDA inspections under the new QMSR, which incorporated 1345 by reference. But it sounds like the inspectors are coming right out of the gate on risk-based approach to everything, and that's how they're starting. So totally agree. It's a great way to start your interview, is to talk about how a person understands and applies risk-based thinking to their role in the quality department.
I also think that will be a really good next episode as well, to talk about FDA findings in following the QMSR updates. So hang in there, listeners. I think this is going to be something else that we're also going to be talking about. So yeah, so the risk-based approach. So a couple of things as an interviewer that you might want to consider asking them is, do they understand how deviations, non-conformities, however you describe them within your QMS, might be handled differently depending on the risk?
And do you know the difference between a deviation and a nonconformance and a nonconforming product and a kappa and whatever all those different terms are that are used throughout the industry? Make sure that you ask your candidate how to define them, or how they define them, or how they understand them. And then if you are the candidate, also key to communicate your understanding of these varied concepts. They're related, but they are different in how they would apply. So I'd encourage you to think of examples from your own working life where you have deployed each of these solutions successfully and applied the risk, the commensurate risk.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things which might be apparent, and we did talk about this within our handling investigations episode. So perhaps if you've got an interview coming up, you might want to check that episode out as well. We spoke about if you've got a non-conformance or a deviation, that you may not want to apply full corrective action. Perhaps just a correction might be okay in terms of the situation. So that's one of the examples that you might want to consider using. We talk about kappa. Now, I've met so many people who are confused about corrective action versus preventative action. So take a moment, look at clause 8, and make sure that you understand that corrective action are actions taken to a identified nonconformity, and then preventative action is actions taken in regards to a potential nonconformity. So always remember the differences between those two. And I think it's something quite easy that people can get themselves mixed up about.
Great example. I also, when I'm interviewing people, I want to understand their experience with audits. Performing internal audits is a big part of the quality assurance department's role. So I want to understand their experience with that and their comfort with that, because that takes a pretty specific skill set. And ideally you might have a credential that tells the interviewer that you've been certified by an independent organization as an auditor, that you've gone through the education and you've demonstrated that knowledge. Whether it's from, I mean, there are a whole bunch of them. There are auditor qualifications that are 1345 lead auditors. There are biomedical auditor certifications, quality auditor certifications from various professional organizations. That goes a long way to demonstrate that you have adequate experience or adequate knowledge of it, not necessarily experience. So I look for how that knowledge was actually applied in previous roles.
In addition, what you might want to consider as an interviewer is, are they actually able to apply those skills practically? So one thing which might be quite a good idea is to present perhaps two, maybe three examples of a potential finding. Now I say potential because you may want to be a bit sneaky here and include something in there which wouldn't necessarily be a non-conformity or a deviation. So making sure that they are able to identify what is a deviation, and in addition that they are able to scale it perhaps appropriately. You may want to consider giving them some sort of grading system. I think different companies often grade their non-conformities differently. As the interviewee, do not be afraid to ask for 1345 standard. I think from my point of view, this would show absolute initiative and confidence in your own abilities when reviewing these findings. So don't be afraid to ask for the standard.
Yeah, great advice. What other kind of skills based questions do you often cover or like to cover in the interviews?
So, from my point of view, it's really important that the interviewee understands how to apply controls relevant to the certain situation. So, this is really sort of building on that risk based approach grounding that we first spoke about. So, another example that you might want to consider, say you are an organization that has multiple projects. We have a project which is on market. And we also have a project which is in early phase R&D. Now, is the interviewee able to appropriately scale those controls and able to ask for the right sort of documentation that they might be after for these two different projects? Now, as the interviewee, what you need to be asking here are for perhaps, you need to be referring to the stages of product realization. Now I say product realization, I'm not talking about design development, because notice I said a project that's on the market. So we're talking about the product life cycle, the total product life cycle here. So you really need to be thinking about the stage of product realization, and therefore the kind of controls that you might be applying for something that's on market. So post-market surveillance, for example, you're going to want to make sure that you've got those controls. But you've got early stage R&D. They're going to need a certain amount of flexibility to make sure that they have the grounding to take the project forward.
Agreed. And I think it's also important to acknowledge here that you might not be hiring people you may be hiring a different level of your organization. You may be hiring sort of a line staff level person who you want to, is maybe more junior in their career, and you want them to process nonconformities and perform audits and things like that. But you might not need them to lead projects, or you might not need them to be that regulatory voice in new product development. But if you're hiring somebody who is a bit more senior in that organization, then I think it's a great opportunity to assess their ability to stand alone, to be the only voice in the room that might, with a certain opinion, and be okay having a different opinion. And also things like project leadership and understanding the processes and the roles that you might be given in those situations.
So it really sounds like here, Susie, you're talking about those kind of soft skills, that cultural fit. So what kind of things would you be looking at in order to be making an assessment for that?
Yeah, well, that ability to stand on your own and have a differing opinion is really important to me, because you're nobody benefits from having unanimous opinions about everything. If you go into a room and everybody agrees on the same thing, um, I don't think you're helping the organization any. I think it's important to ask critical questions and be able to understand and agree, or in some cases disagree. And I think that is hard to do when you are earlier in your career, to disagree with people who outrank you, people who have more technical knowledge than you about whatever product that you're working on. That can be hard for people to do, but it's really, really important. And I absolutely prioritize and value somebody who can do that and who is comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
For my first example, there are others, but that's the first one that comes to mind.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. So once a good friend of mine described quality as being the conscience of the company. And I think that was such a nice way of thinking about it. So in order for that person to be the conscience of the company, they have the confidence to be able to speak up in situations which might be quite uncomfortable. You know, being able to raise things where the company needs a slightly different direction is really, really important. In addition, I think making sure that as the interviewer, the interviewee is able to show that they're able to take constructive feedback. Constructive feedback, in my opinion, now I am going to be honest here, I have received a lot of constructive feedback throughout my career, and I think, Susie, perhaps you have as well. But these are definitely the things which has helped me grow in my career. I wouldn't be where I am now if I wasn't able to receive that. So as the interviewee, making sure to that interview that you are taking some examples of where that you've had that constructive feedback and not being ashamed of it, not thinking it's something that you need to hide, that once you had a certain opinion and now you've changed your opinion. Nobody gets really far in life being pig-headed, do they? So showing that you're open to change and receiving that, that constructive feedback is really beneficial and something that interviewers should be looking out for.
Agree. I would love to hear from a prospective candidate that they received constructive feedback and then how they demonstrated, how they changed their behavior in response to that feedback. So not just saying, "Oh yeah, I have received the feedback before, but then what did I do with it? What did I do about it? How did you um take that on board? What kind of introspection did you have to assess that feedback and alter your behavior if necessary?"
Yeah, there's that horrible question that people ask. It's the cliche, isn't it? What is your biggest weakness? And then people, oh, I'm such a perfectionist. Like leave that like at the door because you're not fooling anybody. But a way that you could actually weave this into your interview is say perhaps something that you needed to work on following the constructive feedback. And therefore, where you are now. So I think that'd be a nice sort of way to twist that question if you were ever asked.
I think there's another like cultural kind of question, cultural or maybe even personality question that is important to me. Um, I want people, like, I very much value people on the team who can make decisions with limited information. You're not going to have all the information all the time. You just aren't. Somebody is going to come to you and they're going to say, "Oh, Amy, this is what happened. What do I do about it?" And I want to make sure that you are comfortable saying, "Okay, this is the information I know, and I can take that on board and apply it to, what I know about our SOPs and the regulations and all those things, and provide direction." And personally, if that decision ends up being wrong, I'm okay with that. Like we can course correct that down the line. I think the most important thing that the organization needs from a quality professional is sort of decisiveness. So that's a characteristic that I will often ask a lot of questions about. Tell me about a time when you had to make a decision based on limited information. What happened? How'd that work out for you? And as an interviewee, it's also a great time to say, it turned out to be the wrong decision, and this is what I did about it. And this is how we fixed it, and this is what came after. Because we adapt as we get new information. That's part of the job.
Really like that. I really, really do like that. And it's becoming a bit of a cliche with me, but that's why Section 8 exists, right? Because you're not going to get things right all the time. But as long as you've got these controls, and if as the interviewee you can say, okay, yeah, no, that wasn't the right decision. However, we followed our CAPA process. However, we followed the non-conforming product process. All these kind of things which you can pull out, which will not only demonstrate that you're able to think on your feet, but you've got a really firm grasp of the contents of the standard as well.
So, Amy, what do you think about the process of an interview, or how you set up an interview cycle as you're trying to bring people on? I'm curious who you involve, who you think should be involved, what that process itself kind of looks like for you.
Yeah, really good question. So for me, it depends on the level. I think most interviews should be about a two-stage process. So in terms of the first process, you want to gain an understanding of does their CV actually fit the requirements of the role. Remember 6.2 human resources. So you want to make sure that you've got you want to make sure that those align up with the job description. Also, they should be demonstrating that they've got the necessary competence at that point. Then I think in terms of the next stage interview, now if the first interview was like a phone call or a Teams or whatever, you want to have them on site, face to face, because I think you get a lot more out of a person. You get to see body language, and I think people just talk a lot in terms of body language. You want to see if they're sort of holding themselves right. You want to see if they're confident. Because there are, several things that, people might be doing if, just kind of curling back, if they're not too confident about a certain question, because that is actually going to give you an insight in terms of, would they be able to make those decisive decisions? Would they be able to maybe raise that problem to people who are more senior than themselves? So in the next stage interview, I would be playing more into that cultural aspect. I would really want to be making sure that they would be a good cultural fit, touching on the topics which we've just discussed.
Yeah, great point. And it reminds me of an article I read some years ago, so I'm not going to get the percentages accurate. But when you're talking about communication in general, the actual words you say and the verbal part of it is such a small percentage of communication, and everything else that goes into it, like your body language and your inflection and your tone of voice and all of those things are so important and make up really the majority of how we perceive communication. So I think that's a great point to have somebody on site and be able to see how they interact and the kind of presence that they have. When I do this same thing, I like to do, a phone interview. Basically, we're just checking the CV. Do they have the basic requirements, the basic understandings? And then I like to do, if I am doing an on-site interview, or if somebody gets to that point of doing an on-site interview, I'll do like maybe the first little section just with me as a hiring manager. And then I'll leave the room and I might have them interact with other people that both on the QA team potentially, as well as an operational counterpart or representative that they might have regular feedback with or interaction with. And sometimes I'll do those together as a panel where you can work off one another, or sometimes just in sequence. And that kind of depends on what the schedules of all these folks allow. But I think that's really useful and beneficial to get other people's like feedback, and maybe even without the hiring manager present, I think kind of tells you a different story. You get additional information.
I think that's really, really insightful. Definitely getting that not user, excuse me, definitely getting that interviewee to be interacting with the people that and the functionalities that they would be having interactions with should they be successful in the interview is definitely key. Because you want to make sure that, they are able to, have conversations with those personnel without it being, any kind of friction or anything like that. So I think that's a definite one for consideration.
And then I'd say the last stage might be your line manager. So it kind of depends on whether your supervisor wants to be involved or how much they want to be involved. But I would reserve their time for like your top two candidates. I certainly wouldn't involve them in every stage of it. But if you get to the point where you've whittled your field down and you're like, these are my top two candidates, I'd like for you to meet with them. And that can just be, a video call or something like that. But I think that can be beneficial to get your supervisor's buy-in on the choices that you're going to make.
So I hope everybody has found that really insightful. If you are coming up for an interview, we wish you the best of luck. Be you're successful. And if any of those tips actually have helped you out, do let us know, because I'd be really interested to see, the places where we've helped out. We've started this podcast as a way of, scratching that mentorship itch. So please do get in contact at qualitycoffeebreak@gmail.com. We'd be really excited to hear your feedback. But until next time, guys.
Don't panic. Read the SOP.
See you next time.